So as we get into our second part and our conclusion of the Deadpool Killustrated story, and what we find here is that we pick up with Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. Now, Ebenezer Scrooge at this particular point in time is being shown what his future is, of course, by the Ghost of Christmas Future. But like the story, when he asks the Ghost of Christmas Future what his future holds, if this is what his future is going to be, the story deviates in the sense that Deadpool has killed the Ghost of Christmas Future. And what he tells Ebenezer Scrooge is that his future is not going to be like this, that in actuality, his casket is going to be of the closed variety, meaning that he's getting ready to kill Ebenezer Scrooge in a pretty gruesome way, which of course he does. And so what we do from here is we jump to the story of Frankenstein. Now, this idea of Frankenstein is actually really, really cool. And the reason why is because, like the story of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, we see that, of course, Dr. Frankenstein brings the creature to life. But what happens, like the story, is that the creature immediately rebels. But the difference here is that when Dr. Frankenstein's trying to understand what's going on, when he's trying to figure out what's wrong with the brain of this creature, we see Deadpool arrive. And Deadpool tells Dr. Frankenstein that he's killed Igor, and that what he had done is he had replaced the brain that was supposed to be put into Frankenstein with a large portion of his own brain. And so what we see, or what we learn here, is that Dr. Frankenstein is killed by his own monster. But what we also see is that, as far as we can tell, the psychopathic Deadpool is now in the body of Frankenstein. And so for the rest of this story, we're going to refer to this version of Deadpool as Frankenstein, and the two of them go about the process of, again, continuing to kill various concepts in the Ideaverse together. And so what we do is we pick up with Sherlock Holmes and his group, and what they're doing is they're continuing to traverse the Ideaverse. We're continuing to go through here and look at the fallout of Deadpool's actions. Of course, at this point, they're using the time machine from the story of H.G. Wells. And so what they find is that alongside the island of Dr. Moreau, as well as Gulliver's Travels and the story of Caesar, that all these various people are dead, that of course all the animals from Dr. Moreau are dead, that the little people from Gulliver's Travels have been killed by Deadpool and Frankenstein, and that all the members of the Senate have been killed by Deadpool and Frankenstein. And so what they begin to realize here is that Deadpool's not traveling alone, that someone is with Deadpool now, and so they have to hurry because now their efforts are twofold, meaning they can do more in a shorter amount of time. And so what we do is we pick up with Deadpool and Frankenstein in the story of the Jungle Book. Now, this one I like particularly because this one actually sticks relatively close to the story of the Jungle Book, that is to say, how it was written, as opposed to the Disney version we had seen. Of course, with the original version of the Jungle Book, what we had seen was that once Mowgli had been more or less cast out of his village, that he had enlisted the help of various animals, and they went back and killed everybody in the village. But with this story, we of course already pick up with Mowgli, with Deadpool and Frankenstein, who have killed various animals in the jungle. And so Mowgli and Bagheera appear to Deadpool and Frankenstein and ask them why they've done this. And Mowgli says it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that they deserve to die for their actions. And so we see Bagheera and Mowgli both attack Deadpool and Frankenstein. And what Deadpool says here is that he's not acting alone, that Mowgli is mistaken if he believes that his intention is something other than to kill, or Deadpool's intention is something other than to kill Mowgli. And so what Deadpool says is that he's enlisted the aid of Shere Khan. And so we of course see Shere Khan the tiger arrive. And what the Frankenstein version of Deadpool tells us here is that Shere Khan had agreed to join their efforts, even though Shere Khan knew that he was going to be killed in the end by Deadpool and Frankenstein. And so what happens is, of course, Shere Khan along with Deadpool and Frankenstein are able to kill everybody from the Jungle Book, including Baloo. And as a result, Shere Khan is killed in the end. And so from this point, we jump to the Caribbean Sea. And what we find with the Caribbean Sea is that we're actually picking up here with Captain Ahab and with Captain Nemo. And what they found here is the wreckage of the Hispaniola, the ship that was written for the book Treasure Island. And what happens here is that as they're going through this, as they're looking through various things, they come to a realization. This realization being that this ship, the Hispaniola, was around long before the ship of Captain Ahab. And that again, even Captain Nemo's ship is far more advanced. And so basically, things are in the wrong time. And so what seems to be happening here is that the multiverse, the idea multiverse, is folding in on itself. That all these different realities that Deadpool is jumping to are beginning to converge into one. And that time itself is beginning to become, meshed together or streamed together to the point where we see various characters from different time frames existing at the same point in time in the same universe. And so ultimately what we see is that once they realize that once they actually arrive arrive at the surface, they come across various wreckage. And what they do here is they find a couple survivors. Now, Captain Ahab's initial intention is to kill them. He simply views them as pirates and says they deserve this kind of treatment. But what Captain Nemo says is they may be able to shine the light on what has happened here, on who it was that had attacked this ship. Even more so than that, if it's the same individuals who had attacked Captain Ahab, then they'll be able to trace these individuals down, find them, and most likely kill them. But what happens is we learn that these two captives are in fact Deadpool and Frankenstein. And so again, Deadpool and Frankenstein go about the process of killing most everybody. The only person they don't kill yet is Captain Nemo, and the reason why is because what we see them do is strap Captain Nemo to a torpedo and then shoot him out of his own ship, at which point he comes into contact with the Little Mermaid, who is revealed to be, I guess, the basis for Nemo the Submariner, and both of them die in the process. And so what we do is we switch over to issue number 4, to the final story of this particular series. And what we find is that we're again picking up with Sherlock Holmes, and Sherlock Holmes is going through and again giving us these small vignettes of these different stories of characters that Deadpool has killed, that he's killed the entire story, or the entire basis behind the story of Macbeth, that he's killed the story behind the Raven and the picture of Dorian Gray. Now, if you guys notice with the picture of Dorian Gray, what's really interesting here is that Deadpool had shot the picture, and there's a reason for that. With the portrait of Dorian Gray, what we had seen was that this was a story whereby a young man named Dorian Gray would be youthful forever as long as a picture of himself was maintained, because within this picture was basically his soul, and the only way to kill him was to destroy the picture. And so this is the reason why Deadpool had shot the portrait of Dorian Gray, because it was the only way to kill him. And so what we do is we transition back to Deadpool and Frankenstein at the Strait of Messina. And what happens here is Deadpool and Frankenstein come across the Greek mythological monsters of Scylla and Charybdis, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm not 100% sure. But while these two characters had existed throughout Greek mythology, ultimately I guess the characters, as far as Deadpool knows about them, was most likely brought to him by the story of the Odyssey by Homer. And so what happens here with these two Greek mythological monsters is that sailors who were traveling through the Strait of Messina basically had to face one of two obstacles. Either they could come across Charybdis, who would consume their entire ship. Charybdis was basically a giant whirlpool in the Strait of Messina, or they could go across Scylla, who would most likely take 6 of their men. And of course, during the story of the Odyssey, we had seen that the ship had decided to go the route of coming across of Scylla and losing 6 of their men in the process. But nonetheless, with this particular story, what we find is that Deadpool and Frankenstein are using the ship of Captain Nemo to basically attack Scylla. And what they do is they trap her, they harpoon her, and it's revealed to us, of course, that Scylla represents Galactus. And what they do is they pull Scylla into the mouth of Charybdis, and then Deadpool sets the ship to explode and then teleports out, which results in both Scylla and Charybdis being destroyed at the same time. And when they teleport out, what we find here is they arrive in Paris in 1627. And what they do here is they basically encounter the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan. Now, of course, with the idea of the Three Musketeers, Deadpool said that his initial intention was to encounter them at some point anyway. And the reason why was because he's angry at the fact that the Three Musketeers candy bar doesn't have any peanuts, which I think is actually a legitimate claim. I love the Three Musketeers candy bar. I think it'd be delicious if it had peanuts, better than it is now, but it doesn't. It's just like some solid block of stuff. But in any event, what happens here is Deadpool, of course, alongside Frankenstein, continue killing various ideas, and they kill the Three Musketeers. But what's really interesting here is that once the Three Musketeers are killed by Deadpool, Deadpool begins to realize that not only do the Three Musketeers basically represent the team aspect, or even the very basis for the concept of the Avengers and the X-Men, but that various superheroes are beginning to die in the process. The concept of them are beginning to go away. And so what happens here is that as they're getting ready to take off, as they're getting ready to leave, they're confronted by Sherlock Holmes and his group. And what Sherlock Holmes says is that this is all going to come to an end, that everything is going to stop now. And so what happens is that basically a large fight breaks out between the group of Sherlock Holmes and Deadpool and Frankenstein. Now, initially, Sherlock Holmes and Watson stay back, and what Sherlock Holmes tells Watson is that eventually their time will come. The opportunity will unfold to where they can take their action, and they can do what they can to kill either Deadpool or Frankenstein or both. both. And when this opportunity unfolds, we find that Watson shoots Frankenstein in the head, effectively killing it, and the psychopathic voice of Deadpool is returned to his mind. But what we actually learn here is that this version of Deadpool had never left. This version of Deadpool had been there the entire time. He had simply just been quiet. And so what we find out here is that as Deadpool is trying to get away, as he's trying to leave and regroup, that his hand is cut off by Mulan. And again, Deadpool and Mulan engage in some sort of a conflict here, but ultimately Deadpool is able to get to the time machine that Sherlock Holmes and his crew were using and use the time machine to escape back into the ocean of the time stream, I guess is the best way to describe it. But Sherlock Holmes travels with him. And what Sherlock Holmes says is that ultimately Deadpool's not going to be successful here, that the Ideaverse will find a way to heal, that it'll find a way to return itself, but Deadpool says it doesn't matter, that the idea has already been planted here, and that if the Ideaverse does heal itself, that ultimately it will heal like a bone that's not set right, that it'll be twisted or it'll be somewhat damaged, but it'll never be the same. And what this seed has done that he's planted is basically given us the idea that superheroes can be killed, that superheroes can die. And so ultimately Deadpool slips back into the time stream, back into the ocean of time, and we don't know exactly where he goes from here. But what we do is we pick up with Sherlock Holmes again as he's on this time machine trying to keep the Ideaverse alive. And the way he's doing this is by basically remembering everything that he had seen up to this point, all the characters and the stories that Deadpool had killed. Now it seems as though he's successful and that in some capacity the Ideaverse will remain alive, but before we find out what happens next, this story comes to an end. With that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. There you can keep up with all the updates from Comics Explained and talk to me directly.